Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey, and if you would like to continue with me, then please download future episodes on iTunes. But today, let me introduce you to my guest, who is Dr Fern Kazlow, otherwise known as Dr Fern. She's the founder of the No Doubt Zone, specialising with working with mavericks, and has an integrated approach working throughout business with entrepreneurs. She had the first holistic centre in New York, and she's proud to be a maverick. So welcome, Dr K.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be with you and to share in your mission. Very, very fun. I love what you're doing, and I loved reading your book. As you know, I read it twice. Not something that I tend to do too often given my schedule, but definitely something that I did with your book. So I had a lot of questions, and I'm hoping that we can really share some of them. There are things that piqued my interest and would love to hear your perspective, and I would bet that they would be of interest to the mavericks and those who may not be mavericks but may live or work with mavericks and are listening.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So let's start.
Well, so one of the first things that came up was when I was really listening to your whole explanation of behavioral mavericks and socialized mavericks and extreme mavericks, I was very intrigued. And one of the questions I wondered about, especially since I'll share in a minute my reaction, was how did people feel about the book? What was the reception you were getting? Were they feeling understood? Were they feeling a little bit, kind of had their feathers ruffled? People who worked with mavericks, what was the response that you've been getting to this notion of socialized, behavioral, and extreme mavericks?
Cool, that's a fantastic question. It's been quite curious, really. Socialized mavericks have said to me, "Oh my gosh, I totally get it. That speaks to me. I understand myself. I wish more people would read your book so they understand me." Funny enough, I've had no responses from extreme mavericks as of yet. People who are maverick behaviourists, so those that are borrowing the traits of a maverick in an area where they want to be successful, like work or maybe in the sports arena, are beginning to understand what they need to do to really amplify their maverick abilities. And the conformists are more, interestingly enough, they're more concerned with what they're learning about mavericks, especially the extreme ones. So the conformist seems to be more interested in extreme maverick behaviour and what they can do to combat it.
And that is interesting. And I would guess that while most people want to be unique, the true conformists are not really interested in being a maverick, but they are interested in being seen in their own unique way and in knowing how to handle, especially the extreme mavericks. My own reaction was interesting because clearly I have always felt like a maverick. And most of my clients, when I talk to them, they've said, I've been a maverick since I'm a kid. I've been a rebel. I've been a disruptor. I've been someone who was clearly different. My favorite ads were Steve Jobs' Think Different ads. At the same time, when I read that socialized maverick, until you and I talked about it a little bit more, I was like, socialized? Who's going to socialize me? You might as well have said caged mavericks to me. And I laughed because once I understood a little more of your thinking, it was like, wow, that's really makes a lot of sense. And I'd love you to share it because I bet I'm not the only one. Maybe I am.
A guy today, and he was saying social maverick. And I was like, no, not social, socialized. And I guess what I'm saying is it's not about how socialized somebody is. This is about looking at a type of maverick, one that's extreme or one that is socialized, it sounds like it's a small difference, but it's quite a large difference. So I'm not saying that mavericks are socialized in the same way as a conformist. So I'm not saying a maverick will conform to be to do the right thing socially. I'm just saying it's a comparison behavioral difference between an extreme maverick and a socialized one.
That's a great distinction. One of the things that after we talked a little bit and I started to, when I reread the book and started to get to know you a little bit more about your perspective, I started to think about the socialized maverick really being your way of saying, we're going to show you how to harness, or even you're going to pick it up yourself, because one of the things you talk about very aptly is that some people just learn it. Some people need some guidance. You were talking about how you were blessed to have guidance like that when you were, on the young side. Yeah. So this idea of really knowing how to take your maverick tendencies, or for some of us, it's just so imbued in us, and have them work for us, because the truth is that they can work for us and they can also work against us. And it is you talk about the paradox. I think that's a paradox that mavericks live with all the time, is they're so passionate about what they want. They have to also not be like the bull in the china shop. So I think that's a great distinction. They're not going to be conformists. You're not saying you're going to try and make them to conformists. What you're saying is you're going to try and help them, if they haven't figured that out on their own, or if they have, to master it. Because I know you talked about mastery, to master those characteristics so they can use them to the fullest extent to benefit their mission. And we know mavericks are very mission driven. So I think that's a really great distinction when I hear you talk about it. Can I ask you another question? It's kind of like getting to ask some of the questions that were interesting to me, just even on picking up the book and our earliest conversation. So one of the things that you said to me in our first conversation was you talked about teaching people how to become mavericks. And to be really honest, I thought, when I said to you, I really want to read that book, I thought, yeah, I really want to read that book. Okay. I didn't know you as well as I do now. Now I really, this is what you said about mavericks. When a maverick, when they see that you know what you're talking about, you gain respect. Otherwise it's like, yeah. So when I heard you say you're going to teach somebody to be a maverick, I thought, okay, let's be a little polite, a little socialized here, and say, I really want to read this book. And I was really thinking, okay, I really want to see what you have to say about this. How are you going to do this? Now I'd love for you to share that, because there's so much value in these characteristics. And now I know you're not really wanting to do anything really crazy and change people's DNA. But I'd love you to speak to that, because I know that's that whole nature versus nurture. And sometimes that gets us stuck. We create limitations with it because we say, I'm not like that. Sometimes we think I'm not like that in a way that's really good. Sometimes we think I'm not like that, and we limit ourselves and we just say, I can't ever do that because it's just not who I am. And you're saying something a little different. And that is that I can teach you not to change your DNA, but I can teach you something that maybe you don't think you can learn right off the bat. So I'd love you to tell us more about that.
Okay. Thank you. And I love that. And it's so socialized maverick. It's so honest. It's like, yeah, I don't believe you. Right.
Prove it to me. Prove it to me, Jude. I want to see that, because I'm always curious. Curiosity is a huge trait in myself and in most mavericks. So it was really this little bit of a challenge, but also a lot of curiosity, because I already knew enough to know that you're not just blowing air, that you do know, but I didn't know how much you knew when I first had that reaction. So tell us more, please.
Thank you again. A conformist doesn't really want to change. Unless they really have to. A maverick behaviourist is a conformist who has made that jump and has decided that they really have to change in some area, typically their workspace. So in their workspace, they are more, they can be more maverick, so they more willfully independent, which will mean that they will stand up for things that they don't believe is right. They'll be far more honest, they're much more trustworthy, they'll look at things in a different way to make sure things are executed well. And when I looked at mavericks, I wanted to see what it is about mavericks that was similar. So for example, all mavericks have certain attributes, and those attributes are willful intention, honest belief, influential, knowledgeable, execution and output driven, and success driven, which I've used the acronym of WINES because I thought that was quite easy to remember. So all mavericks are like that, but the successful mavericks are the socialized mavericks, and I wondered what it was about them that made them different from extreme. And from that, I pulled out the sort of keystone capabilities that they have, the way that they utilize power differently, how objective they are. And once I pulled that out, I was then able to say, you know what? for those who want to make that step, those conformists that want to become maverick behaviourists, this stuff is teachable. But the problem is it can be a lot of effort. So maverick behaviourists will never become a socialised maverick because it's not in their DNA, it's not in their personality type. But whilst they're at work, they can take those success drivers and utilise them there.
So it brings up two questions for me. One is, are there certain characteristics that are more malleable than others? And are there certain people, if we, once we know there's a continuum of conformists and social behaviorists, is there something? Is it the why? Is it the personality? Is it the experiences? What is it that you found has been the biggest factor? And I know you kind of hinted to that a little bit when you said they don't change unless they really, 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 really have to. So is there some personality that's a little bit more on the cusp? Is it that experience, or is it that why? It makes me think about, the parent in a desperate situation, or there's someone who's really desperate to take care of their family, or, make sure that whatever it is that their mission is, that's really important to them. So I'm curious about both of those. Are there any characteristics that you find are more malleable, or some that really aren't malleable at all? And then are there certain things that, are there critical moments? Is there a moment where somebody might be more malleable than at another time? Because I certainly see that in my own practice, working with mavericks and disruptors. And, there's entrepreneurs in the top 1% to 4% who want to make a difference, and they've done really well, but for some reason they're stuck at something. So here we're talking about something a little bit different, but it's that same idea of what are those critical moments that make somebody able to do something that's outside of their realm of comfort, or what they even thought was possible.
Wow, your questions. I can see why your clients come back to you time and time again. Your questions are amazing. I would say that...
Thank you.
I think environment is one of them. And I'll give an example. I was asked by a corporation to come in and really to radically change their HR department. And they gave me a member of staff to specifically work with amongst a group of other people. When I looked at the different employees at this one was a little bit more senior, and I thought she had a lot of maverick traits within her. So we worked quite closely together, and I encouraged her ways of thinking, some of the strategies, and like all socialized mavericks, we like to engender more leadership, more leaders. So she did some amazing stuff working under me, and I was talking to her previous boss because she was seconded over and saying, gosh, she's such a maverick. I like the way she thinks. She's so different. And her boss said, what do you mean? She's not like that at all. And I was like, really? Because he was doing some amazing stuff and coming up with some amazing things. And then I realised that, because I spoke to her about it, I realised that her boss was very conformist in nature and very rule-driven. And the thing with maverick behaviourists I noticed is that they're very fragile, especially when they're starting to do that. So whilst I worked with her for a few months, she achieved so much and she was so amazing. And when I left the organisation, she went back to her old boss, who basically said, nope, you don't have authority to do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, that's a stupid idea. And not only did she become more conformist again, but she became so disengaged in that environment that they lost an amazing resource. Still there, but she's gone now, if you see what I mean. She's completely lost. Gone. So I think one thing's environment, so being around other people that will allow a maverick spark to grow and develop with guidance makes a difference. Also, I think for a conformist to suddenly decide to make that step, it often becomes down to either a huge life-changing event, which means they have to do it, or a real desire for change. And then they'll say, okay, I'll take some risks. But I think the biggest thing is having leaders around them that actually will allow them to lead.
Wow. You've got such amazing insight. I love listening to the things you're saying. And I've got a whole long list of questions, and I know we don't have enough time to address all of them. So I'm going to try and pick the one or two that feel like they can't wait for another conversation, and ask you to speak to them, because you're touching on something that you touched on, not just with the conformist, but when you talked about, you had some wonderful case studies that I could immediately recognize, some of my own history and certainly history of my clients, where you had a maverick that was bringing so much to the corporation, but because they didn't understand how to keep that spark going, how to utilize it, how to keep them from shutting down. They really did. Just what you said. They may not have left, but they left. And I wonder, from your perspective as a consultant, as someone who knows that world so intimately, what do you suggest to corporate managers, and what do you suggest to individuals so that they can know when to stay or when to go, or how to make it possible to stay if they want to stay? Do you have any advice that you can give us besides what's in the book? And I recommend everybody, really read that book. But I'm wondering what you could share now about that question of how do you know when a corporation has that flexibility to meet the needs, the willingness to do so, or when you as a corporation should say, look, we can't meet that. We appreciate what you've done and have a really nice parting, because Mavericks don't always part nicely. Or how someone should know when to keep trying rather than shutting down, or when to, again, leave before they go on shutdown and find something where they can have that, next adventure. Because you talked about one of your, my favorite things that you said in your book about challenge and influence being like oxygen to Mavericks. And it's true. Without it, they die. And they may not physically die in that moment, but I believe we're always moving towards our life and our most impactful self, or we're moving towards, death. If we're not our most impactful self, it's true of everybody, but I got to say it's true of, if I had a dial for conformists, it might be way lower. For Mavericks, that dial is all the way turned up. And if they're not leading an impactful, fulfilling life, they really, they're dying. So how do you help somebody know what to do so they don't go into shutdown, they don't get disillusioned, they don't just say, the world is just, kind of a crappy place, but they can do something so that they stay alive and decide, should I stay or should I go? I know that was like a lot more than one question. I'm guilty.
Yeah, wow. It's interesting you say that, because you're right, Mavericks don't always go well, especially if they're extreme. They'll probably destroy the place first. And a socialized Maverick will just opt out emotionally and inability whilst they're looking around to go somewhere else. I think there's two main questions there. What would the organisation do if it's time for the Maverick to go? And what should the Maverick do deciding when to go? And I think the organisation one is perhaps the easiest. If you allow the socialised or even the extreme Maverick to go because you've recognised you cannot physically do anything more, then you will have the respect from that Maverick, which will mean that they will actively help you get your replacement, train up the staff before they go, and they will talk about you in such glowing terms when they've left that people will want to work with you. And it's good to remember that Mavericks, especially socialized ones, will have a huge network of people. I think in terms of the Maverick, should they go or not, I think part of it is understanding the organisation. Is the organisation one that is from a growth mindset or a learning mindset? How much autonomy are you likely to get? Thinking about it, actually, I think the biggest thing is how much influence do you have? So that we all come, often Mavericks are called into organisations because something's wrong. And if you were already in it, you would probably leave, but you're called to make that change. So it becomes a challenge. So the question would be, are you able to influence into another challenge or not? Because if you can't, you're just not going to be happy. And if you're not happy and you're a socialised Maverick that's still quite early on in its socialisation, you could end up slipping back into extreme behaviour and causing problems. And that's not going to ultimately do your reputation any good. So I think in some respects is to look at it selfishly and saying, what am I getting from this? Am I able to influence a change for the better or not? And if I'm not, then it's time to leave, but to leave well, as you say.
Yes, it's great points. And the idea of it being selfish is interesting to me, because what's in their best interest really is in the interest of the company, because as we just talked about, if they leave and they don't leave on good terms, that's not good for anybody. Mm-hmm. And also they've got another mission, another place to make a difference, whether it's doing something on their own, whether it's another another company along the same lines or a different, related mission or something totally different. They've got something else that they're going to do. If they're Maverick, they're going to find something else. And so it's not only that they're going to be shutting down and it's not going to be good for their, who they are and their fulfillment. It really is keeping the world. I don't want to sound so like, oh, she's talking about the world and good for the world. But yeah, it's really true. Mavericks are the ones that believe they can change the world, and they're the ones who do. Mm-hmm. So if they stay where they've done what they could do and they're finished, they're really stopping themselves from participating and doing more good in the world. So I think we often think, oh, this is kind of selfish. And I think that was a great thing that you said that, because we think, well, it's kind of selfish and maybe my family needs me to work and maybe the company I'm doing, they're loving that I'm here, because often a Maverick can be overqualified for a position, especially at a certain point when they've done their mission. But that choice of moving on, something I didn't think about when I was asking you the question, but came up listening to you, was in there. If they don't move on, they're really not doing all the good they're here to do in the world. They're really shutting down that impact that to a Maverick really is like oxygen, and to the rest of the world really makes a difference. So there's so many sides to this. Can I ask you one last question before we stop?
Go for it.
Okay. So one of the things when I was reading the book, I kept thinking about Elon Musk, Steve Jobs. Sheryl Sandberg was easy. Okay. She was easy, like to peg as a socialized Maverick. But when I thought about some of the other people, especially like a Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, I was thinking, okay, where would Jude put them in her schema? Do they go back and forth? Where are they? It's not because, and I think it's really good for everybody to know, this is not just a clear cut, you're here, you're there.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, I've been wanting to ask you that question since the first time we spoke. So where does Elon Musk, where does Steve Jobs, where do they fit in this categorization?
Very good question. Funny enough, it's something that I'm developing in my second book at the moment, but if there's a pathway, you're in a journey, and it's one that you never really finish. And I think you can tell how socialized a socialized Maverick is by how quick they can revert to extreme Maverick behaviour. So it's an act of development going through. So I would say someone like Steve Jobs became a socialized Maverick enough to get what he needed doing and to be one that would fit in to what was required to provide the influence that he needed. Where he was in his organisation, he didn't need, I don't mean like necessarily he was the CEO, but I mean in terms of the organisation itself and its own evolution. He didn't need to continue his socialisation to become a socialised Maverick further than where he got to. Do you see what I mean? So he was not extreme, but he wasn't a socialised Maverick to the point where, say, you and I are. He went as far as he needed to get.
My mother might disagree with you. She's not alive anymore, but she would disagree.
It's one of degrees. But he didn't need to, he wanted to keep that extreme Maverick edge because that's what he felt the company needed, I feel. And I think where he could have come further down that path. Could there ever be a time that that's a good thing? I think that he probably felt that he didn't need to.
So also, is there ever, related to that, are there ever times that maybe it's a good thing that somebody like a Steve Jobs can't be completely, or doesn't choose to be, can't be, however we want to look at it, but for whatever reasons, they don't go entirely into the socialized realm and do get socialized as much as they need to, but really keep that edge that's a little bit more extreme, not out of control, but clearly made a difference in the world in a way that few have. So it's an interesting question of one that I think your system lends itself to, and certainly you do when you talk about it, that there's a continuum and there's some room for some different things, and not everybody, we never put a Maverick in a box. And I think Steve Jobs and Elon Musk in this discussion really speaks to that. Even the questions I'm asking when I think about them, there's certainly the questions of somebody who doesn't like boxes.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think if you think about it, a Maverick will decide where they're getting their best return from. and mavericks change when there's a compelling reason. He didn't need a compelling reason to be any different. When I was going through my own socialization, in terms of a maverick, I needed to come much further because of the positions I was doing and the roles I was doing, and the fact that for many years I was the youngest senior manager in the various companies I worked at, and often the only female. So I had to walk down that pathway a lot further and a lot quicker than say Steve Jobs. But I think it's also, I know you're not alluding to it because I feel like I understand the way you're thinking, but it can also be seen as saying the more socialized you are, the more socialized maverick you are, the more that you've lost your edge. And it's not like that at all. This is about a good analogy I would say is a maverick is a wolf. A socialized maverick, as it walks towards down that pathway, can appear to be more like a domesticated dog. But the nature hasn't changed. It's just the way that that person is perceived, that animal is perceived, because it doesn't take too much necessarily for that dog to go running off and howling at the moon. It's just that it appears to become domesticated, but it never does.
That's great. I love talking with you and you sharing your insights, especially since our experiences, while you work with entrepreneurs, have such a wealth of experience in the corporate world. And I took my, maverick traits and moved outside of the corporate realm pretty early and, resisted except to go in and visit for brief stints as a consultant. I work much more with those who are in the entrepreneurial world, occasionally those mavericks in the business world, in the corporate world, those that get called the intrapreneurs, but more the ones that are outside. So, we could go on. And one of the questions really is, are there differences, in those entrepreneurs that choose, or in those mavericks that choose to be in an entrepreneurial position outside of a corporation, or someone that chooses to be a maverick and, really make their stake and make the change and make their impact within a corporation. So
I think that's
fascinating.
I think that's interesting. Because as you know, I also work with business owners, entrepreneurs, and individuals as well now. And I would say most of the people that I work with in that space are the ones that have got fed up with working in the corporate space, because often they found that the corporate space did not have the level of integrity and moral fibre that is necessary for a socialised maverick to be comfortable with. So they've spent time influencing and then maybe changing companies or maybe changing industries and then discovering, it doesn't fit my values, and have decided to move out. So I think, generally speaking, a socialised maverick can take more risks if it's their own company, because they have less interference to go through. But are they different? Not sure. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it, but I don't feel that they're any different other than the fact there's less constraints.
I mean, it sounds like this is a whole other conversation that, requires some thought and would be really interesting. What you said is fun, because it is, my last experience in working for a company, what I left just for that reason. And that was the last one. I'd been a consultant in another number of situations. My next to last one was one where they said, I'd come in, I'd started a school. It was really exciting. It was really cool, and it was done. And so it really was time for me to move on. And they agreed and I agreed. And we had a really good parting because it was time and we both knew it. There was nothing else exciting for them to offer me. I had done my job and it was great and it was time to move. But the position that I had as a consultant after that, so both of these were consulting positions, but they were more full-time consultants. It was really where the integrity wasn't there. And I couldn't play that game or stand by and say nothing. And again, it was really clear to them that I couldn't play. And it was really clear to me that I couldn't play and wouldn't play. And that was the last time. And when I think about my clients, while some have always been, and I was, this was a long time ago. So I've been an entrepreneur since I always say since I'm 8, maybe it was before, but since second grade. But I did have a couple of jobs out of school for a number of years, even while I had my own entrepreneurial enterprises going on the side. But those were the reasons that I finally said, okay, it's full-time entrepreneur, not a little bit of this part-time here, part-time there. And also realizing that I could never have the impact that I wanted to have doing my own thing part-time. I had to really take the plunge and just do it. But I think when I think about clients of mine, some of them have been, entrepreneurs, except a little bit like I did outside of school for a couple of years where they needed to kind of have a job. Some forever have worked on their own, but often it really has been that lack of integrity and feeling that they just couldn't have the impact that they could have on their own. So interesting question about those who said, I can make the impact within, and those who made the decision of, I just can't.
What's interesting about that is because you mentioned something that I've neglected to say. And I think sometimes mavericks have a cause. So once they're doing really well in their corporate life and they become more specialized in the areas that they have interest, and then realize that there is nowhere else to go because they've discovered what their cause is, but they can't do it within organizations because it no longer fits what the organization wants to do. So then they have to do their own thing elsewhere to get the challenge and to follow. I love what you said about mavericks on the mission, especially socialized mavericks. And I think after a while, you decide that you have a mission that you want to do, and your mission isn't the same as the mission of the company. And that's when you part ways as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think for mavericks, it often is that feeling of not only that you want to do, but that you're driven. You really have to do it. It's not a choice. It keeps you up at night if you're not doing it. Because many of my, clients who are very successful, they'll say to me, people look at me and they say, look at the success, look at the money, look at the difference you're making. Aren't you satisfied? And I always say that the people who come to me are the ones who answer that question and say, no, there's something else I still need to do. I'm not finished. I'm not done. Whereas other people might say, I've done it. This is it. I think the mavericks, when they do just what you're saying, they can't do it in the company. There's something specific that's their mission. They have to do it. It's not only, I'd like to, but it really is that calling that if they don't do it, it's keeping them up at night. I was saying to some and they they really feel like they can't rest without it.
All socialized mavericks have a cause. They have something bigger than themselves that they must do. So whereas, a conformist has a job, and if they won the lottery, they would stop that job. Whereas the socialized maverick has a cause, has a mission that they must achieve, and it's bigger than themselves. And if they won money, they would be like, wow, I can now spend this money on getting this cause done properly.
Exactly. It's the question to mavericks all the time. When are you planning to retire? And they kind of look like, retire? Why would I retire? Or do you mean retire from, this and go on to that? It really is that relationship to the calling. So this has been great. And it's very fun talking to somebody else who's, works with mavericks and to really get a chance to share some of the questions, to me, the paradox of mavericks is one of the most exciting and yet challenging things, both within myself and with others. It's, to be able to do that balance of the gift and the challenge. And it really is. Being a maverick is a gift, and there's no question it's also a challenge. So it's very fun to have this conversation. And I'm delighted that you put down what you did in the book and that you've opened a platform for people to really share and learn how to make the most of the mavericks' characteristics within themselves and kind of get them so that they can help the most people, and those who want some of those characteristics, that there are ways that they can do that and still be who they are.
Thank you so much. This has been a whole lot of fun having this conversation with you. So thank you so much for that. And I hope that we will have many more talks.
Oh, I look forward to it. Again, I thank you for inviting me. I thank you for just kind of starting this conversation, and to all those who are listening. I look forward to hearing your comments, seeing some emails and just seeing what resonates, what gets sparked in you, because Jude certainly has sparked a lot of questions in me, being somebody who's worked with mavericks for, a very, very long time and been one my whole life. It's really fun to see some of the things and to you've just sparked so many things in this discussion. So thank you.
Very much. Bye-bye. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Dr. K as much as I enjoyed having it. If you'd like to contact Dr. K, please do so via her website, which is drkazlow.com, which is Kazlow, or via Facebook, Dr. Kazlow, or even Twitter, Dr Fern Kazlow. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to the show on iTunes. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all of our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.